Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I am your host, Daniel Lowry, and in today's episode, it is more in our A+ exam. So thank you for joining us, and also joining us, well, it would be a day without him if we didn't have Mr. Wes Bryant on the set with us. Wes, glad to have you yet again. How's it going?
Man, it's going great. Looking forward to continuing on in our laptop hardware and components. We've been looking at, well, our, one form of our mobile devices. I want to be careful in saying that because we do have an additional episode that's coming up that we'll talk more about things like tablets, if you will, and smartphones. But we're really talking about mobility, right? In the first part of this this little mini-series that we're doing here, we talked about the major factors when it comes to laptops, right? Remember, that is battery life. That's one of the things that's very, very important. How long can we get life out of the battery without having to plug into some kind of external power source, as well as proper thermal management? Remember that we don't have a lot of the space that we have inside of things like your desktops and even more so your servers to stuff a whole bunch of fans in there, if you will, these huge, gigantic heat sinks to transfer and dissipate the heat away from our hot components like our CPU and our memory. We also talked a little bit about, well, some of the ways that you could expand the functionality, for instance, in your express card technologies, as well as things like some of the adapters or dongles you could see inside of your laptops too. Or I guess in the second part would be on the outside of your laptop. In this one, what we want to kind of do is we're going to kind of move into some of the special functions that we can perform, or we can manipulate, if you will, the laptop into performing through things like your function keys. And I want you to understand, again, going out the gate, that we don't have a consistency in this. And that's because one of the things that is common across all that is consistent is that you have function keys, right? The function keys, whether you can press them by themselves or you have some kind of keyboard shortcut, right? Like the F and the N key, if you will, on your motherboard to actually use the function keys, is going to change pretty much greatly between laptop to laptop. Now, one of them that kind of does stay consistent is if you have a MacBook, right? MacBook is pretty much stayed consistent between the different MacBooks that they have on how you're going to access these function keys. All right, then let's take a look at what we're talking about here. If we go to the SkyCam here, you'll see that we essentially have our MacBook, right? So this is an example of a MacBook Pro, and it's a relatively new one, considering one of the other ones that we're going to show you here in a bit. And notice if we kind of zoom in here, you'll see that we have across the top here, right? We have our F keys, right? These are the function keys. Now, function keys also have additional functionality built into them, right? For instance, right, you can see things like here our brightness, right? We can go dimmer if we use the function key. We can go a little bit brighter if we want. But for Mac, if I want to access the actual F1 functionality, I actually have to hit this key here, and that's why I said sometimes it could be just a keyboard shortcut. Now, you also have, like for instance in PC, they kind of do the opposite, right? If you press the F1 key, you get the F1 functionality. And if we want, let's say for instance on a PC, if you wanted to dim it, you would actually press the function key and then whatever the key is across the top to access that special functionality.
So one of the few times I actually agree with Apple's philosophy here is I don't typically use a lot of F1, F2, F3, F4 in my day-to-day workings, but I do brighten and dim the screen and do the other function stuff that I would normally have to hit a function key with. On the Mac, I don't have to.
And I agree with you, Dan. The only time I've really had to use like the function, like the F1 key, is an Azumit utility that we use inside a PC. It's the only time I've ever actually used, or F5 to refresh. That's about the only one. Like, so if Mac, if you can help us out there, put a red key somewhere on the keyboard somewhere where we could refresh our web page. Other than that, that's really the only way in PC, the only time I really used it. So you can see, that's some of the functionality. Now there are other ones here too that we'll kind of talk about too. You have things like, for instance, you can see things like volume, right? You can see, for instance, we have speaker volume, and that is something, volume settings up and down. whether you want to, to get a little bit louder, get a little bit, quieter. It could be something, in some of them, they do have the ability across the function keys to actually turn the touchpad on and off. A lot of times this is a setting because, just because of, if you do what I do and you can't type to save your life, you fat finger the keyboard, you can turn your touchpad off and that can be problematic. So a lot of times, especially in things like Windows operating systems, that'll be something that's set inside of the mouse options in the operating system, or even more so, like for instance, if you have an Intel platform where Intel has their own third-party software that can do all of the extended functionality of the touchpad too. Now, you will see sometimes that in here, you'll have things like, you'll see a little, looks like a little cell tower, right? And that cell tower could mean a couple of things. It could actually mean that there's a cell card that turns cellular on and off, or it could be Wi-Fi, right? Which, you could turn your Wi-Fi adapter on or off. Now, you can see that we don't have this ability inside of the Mac here. Mac has right there on the top of their screen, you got a little setting that you can just right-click and you can turn your wireless on and off there as well. We talked a little bit about screen brightness. Bluetooth is another one here. Now, I will tell you that Bluetooth is becoming less popular for turning it on and off because of the, on the function keys, and here's why. Remember that we said that battery life was very, very important when it comes to a laptop, right, or any mobile device for that matter. Well, one of the great things about Bluetooth as it's matured over the years is that today's Bluetooth 4.0 and beyond, we're seeing are low powered, which means that the device itself will probably not outlast the battery, if you will, that powers Bluetooth. It's very low power. It's not power hungry as it was in the previous generations, and that's because when you go through the pairing process inside of Bluetooth, and that's where the two devices, right, whether you have to enter some kind of PIN or something, right? They form this security, this trust relationship, and they start communicating between one another. Well, in past revisions of the Bluetooth specification, even though you didn't have to manually do that like you do the first time you set it up, in the background, underneath, if you open up the hood and look at the engine, it was still repairing. And I don't mean repairing as in fixing. It would go through the repairing process in the background constantly, and what it would be doing is generating new session keys and stuff like that for security purposes, right? Making sure that it was constantly updated. And that's a good thing, right? Because we don't want somebody, right? We talk about in other security episodes, right? You want something to be ephemeral. You don't want it to be real static when it comes to security, because let's say Dan's computer has a static communication, and I'm out there on the network and I've got a piece of software that can actually see that information. Well, if it's static and it never changes, I got all the time in the world to grab some of that information and I can pass it off to Dan's computer as though I'm him, and now I've taken him out of the mix and there's some kind of security loophole. So beneficial for security, right? Not so beneficial for your battery, because that extra process, that extra communication would take some of your battery power. Now, I know I'm rambling a little bit on here on Bluetooth, but Bluetooth is a very low-powered communication unlike it has been in the past. So it's probably one of the reasons you don't see a lot of the on-off Bluetooth physically on the keyboards today, versus you do have the settings inside of your operating system. All right, the other thing too here that we have to look at, you'll see on this MacBook here, definitely screen orientation, right? Portrait, landscape, sometimes you have that, sometimes you don't have that. It really depends on the device itself. You also have things like, for instance, media options, right? And we can see the media options right here, right? Fast forward, rewind, play, and pause, which is kind of interesting today because you don't really see a lot of these, hard buttons like you used to in the old days of like wow, I'm really going to age myself here, back on cassette tapes, CDs and stuff like that, because we have built-in media players today, but you still could have and could see, and a lot of times do, these hard buttons. The other thing that you could have on these devices too, sometimes denoted by a little airplane symbol, is something known as airplane mode, right? When you're taking off, right, taxiing the runway, they'll tell you time to turn all radio devices off, which I've kind of always thought is funny, is that my little, potential $400 laptop could potentially disrupt a multi-million-dollar aircraft aviation system. So go figure. But you could, go into plane mode and it turns off all the radios. And again, the theory behind it, joking aside, is that, it shouldn't interfere with any kind of communications that are going on the plane. However, you'll see that a lot of these communications are going over fiber optic communications anyways to alleviate electromagnetic interference. So just a little side note and rant there, but fun nonetheless. One of the last things that I'll talk about when it comes to some of the special function keys that we have here too is GPS. And I don't have a button for this one here, but again, the ability to turn off the global positioning system within the device itself. That really depends on, and a lot of these depend on the device you have. There is no one size fits all. PC is a hodgepodge of different manufacturers, different possible arrangements and configurations. About the only consistency, and I'm not saying, hey, Mac is better than PC. They all have their place in the world. They all have goods and bads. But really, when it comes down, and I'm a Windows guy, I'm a PC guy, all right. But when it comes down to it, about the only one I've seen that really does have consistency is the Mac world, right? You can see that for the most part over the years, they've kept that same arrangement.
Yeah, they got that really cool LED one now, right? That kind of lights up instead of having a physical button. Even though you do touch it, it's basically just a small LCD or OLED bar across the newer MacBooks. Very cool.
It really is, and some people some people are resistant to change and like, I need a tactile interface. Well, you've got touch screens, right? Tactile might be going away here in the next few years, and I'm not claiming that we only need 64K of RAM and that's all we'll ever need. But what I'm saying is that some people, for them, they might like a tactile interface. And really, I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, Dan, too, because that if you're a technician, right? You're not technically a salesperson, and please don't try to be that salesperson unless you're helping your end user out, because that just comes down to ethics, right? Is that you might do exactly that. You might ask somebody, are you one of these people that needs a tactile type button, a button that you could feel and press, right? Well, maybe you need the function keys. However, if you're like us, we're geeks. We doesn't have to be tactile. It could be touch interface just because it's cool. Well, then the newer MacBooks that have that, absolutely, that's great. I know our CEO here. He is on the forefront of anything Mac that comes out. He's got to have.
Oh, he's a total fanboy.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's sold out hard for them, big time.
Definitely, and in fact, he got one of these the moment they came out,
Yeah.
right? And his whole thing that he was happy about, and I'm going to date myself on this one, is the fact that it could do the little Knight Rider front screen. So basically, paying an extra $1,000 for a laptop just so you can have a Knight Rider red LED
pass
going
on
back front. Yeah, exactly. And again, that just always begs the question: well, which one is going to be more convenient when it comes to repairing? Well, there is no right answer or wrong answer on that one, right? Let me tell you both sides of the story here, all right? If I've got a tactile interface, those can damage, right? Those are susceptible to component corruption, right? Any kind of corrosion that gets in there. Don't do what I've done in the past and decide that your laptop's thirsty and give it a drink, right? It starts to corrode. But then the other side of it is the fact that, well, you know what? You also have logic that's built into the LCD or the touch interface ones as well. And they use things like digitizers, or could use something like a digitizer that actually, or capacitive touch, could be resistive touch, and those interfaces can go wrong too. So while there is the lack of a tactile touch, right, don't think that there isn't some kind of mechanism in there that could get corrupted or corroded. And then you add on to the fact that those boards also use additional drivers and logic. So now you've got a couple of extra things that are going along with it as well. So just like computing and any computing device we've talked about, there's pros and cons, there's goods and bads. Keep in mind what the what the necessities of the customer is, right? And remember that you have to keep your wants essentially out of it, right? Because what you want might not be what the customer wants. Dan and I, while we agree on a great many things in computing, there's things that we are the polar opposites on, right? And that comes from each of our personal experience. It doesn't mean one's right over the other. It's called personal computing for a reason. And what's personal, when it comes to your computing environment, what it comes to your likes might not be what the customer is. So just listen to your customers, right? And one of the best benefits that you can do is if you're supporting anybody in a help desk, first of all, listen. I know I have a problem with this one, and don't ask my wife because she'll tell you. We have to learn to close our mouths and listen with our ears, right? So listen to what the customer's wants are, understand what the customer's wants are, and then when it comes down to it, just give them options based on your experience. You could say, well, this is why I don't, or this is why I do.
Tell them why they're wrong and tell them what they should have instead.
That's right. We'll go Nick Burns on them and say, just step away from the keyboard, right?
That's not right.
And
you should do this.
I was going to say, and Dan is completely kidding on that one, right? But seriously.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the function keys, again, guys, those are some of the ones that you can see on the exam. It's some of the the ones that you want to understand that do exist and what they do. There is one that I will mention, and a lot of times this is a functionality of the network adapter that's built in. You'll see when we go into, if you're looking at the objectives and following along, it's the very first one in the list. You might say, well, Wes, why'd you skip over that one, right? That's called dual displays. Anytime we talk about dual monitors, and the reason I say this is because in the earlier days of laptops, you could have a hard-coded function key that would allow you to push the display adapters, what it's displaying, to a second monitor. And what I mean by that is, until that button was pushed, you didn't get dual displays, right? You could toggle on and off. However, with the smart or the logic that's built into those graphic adapters, the way they've come so far, guys, we've got docking stations that we hook up to, and instantly it's spread. Driver installed. Let me preface this with driver installation first, right? It spreads it right across all three monitors. And then what you need to make up the decision is, how do I want those arranged, right? And that's not necessarily going to be something that could be done on the function key itself. A lot of times that's going to be set within the operating system, right? So in Mac, we go to System Preferences, go to Display Option, if you will, and then there's an arrangement, there's color and arrangement, and we basically move them where we need to. However, if you're inside of a Windows-based PC, it could be as simple as right-clicking on the desktop and choosing screen resolution. And then when you pull up the screen resolution that you'll see when we get into our operating system, you arrange the monitors that way. But notice that that necessarily isn't a hard-coded tactile function key on the motherboard today versus a setting logically inside of the operating system. And it is strictly contingent on the network, or not the network adapter, but the video adapter's capabilities. Most of them today are capable of doing that, even on your tablets for that matter, because a lot of your tablets are using small, ultra-small form factors of the same type of graphics cards that we see built into expansion cards. All right, so I think we've kind of run that horse to exhaustion there. Understand the different functions that you can have. Again, there's no consistency of them inside of them, and it really depends on what the necessity is of the user that you might be supporting or users. Now, the next thing we get into is it can be a confusing topic if you've never seen it before. All right, what I'm talking about is a docking station. And the reason I say that it can be confusing is because there's two different types of docking stations, right? There's what's known as a docking station, and there's what's known as a port replicator. The interesting thing is, what I like about it is they've taken the term port replicator off of the exam objectives. All right, and I like that because, you know what a docking station is called? Sometimes an advanced port replicator. All right, and either way you look at it, for the most part they're doing the same thing. However, one has the functionality more like a USB hub versus one that is a platform that quite literally you clip the laptop into. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to go, I've actually got one pulled up here on my screen here. And this is one kind of like our facilities manager here is. The guy behind the scenes that a lot of time doesn't get a credit for some of the videos that you watch, Mr. Nate Copeland. And I believe this is one of the types that he has, right? This is for the Lenovo ThinkPads, or Lenovo. Dan's our English master over here. I don't know how that's pronounced.
I've always heard it Lenovo.
Lenovo, okay. Yeah. We'll go with that. And I trust your word on that one. All right. And if we kind of, let me go ahead and click on this and we can kind of see here. And again, guys, you can see the price on there. So let's give credit to Newegg, right? $164 here, guys, because this is all their, I love their interface here. You can kind of really look at what it is. If you'll, well, first of all, let's kind of zoom in. All right, what you end up having in a docking station is this, oh, I guess that's all I can do here. We can go a little bit farther. You have this little clip, all right? Now, let me also say about docking stations, they are uber proprietary. And what I mean by proprietary is, remember, we talked about standardization, especially in our networking section, as a way to give interoperability between dissimilar protocols, and we don't get vendor locked. Sorry, guys, you don't get the option here, right? And that's another thing that I might say about port replicators. Sometimes port replicators and USB external hubs, they could switch between stations. In fact, the ones that we use here at IT Pro TV will also hook up to a PC as well as Mac. And that's the benefit versus a docking station like this. I have to have that exact clip. I have to have a Lenovo ThinkPad, right? I can't take a MacBook, and that's pretty consistent with Mac because they're really proprietary about their hardware designs. But I couldn't take one of these Dell PCs, right, or PC-based laptops and lock it in, right? So that is something that I kind of want you guys, ladies and gentlemen, to know out there, is that docking stations are very, very proprietary. Now, this is kind of cool. I like this too because, well, with the docking station, this one actually has thumbprint. Right, so we have biometrics recognition on one side of this. I believe we got a power button, and I know Nate's has this one too. And I might be a little bit wrong on that one. Let me
I
look
think that
here.
might be the eject button.
It might, yes, absolutely, yeah, yep, it might be, and I don't see it here, but okay, yeah, you're probably absolutely right there on that, Dan. Again, again, keep in mind that the functionality and features that they have is really kind of, oops. Go ahead and get out of here. This one doesn't have the setting that I'm looking for. Try that again. There we go. That's what I want. All right. So you can kind of see that we have the different different functionality and feature. Now, I was wanting to, and if I could find it here, there we go. I want to spin this around. All right. Let's go ahead, because I want to show you the backside of this. If you don't see the backside, then you kind of don't really understand what the heck is this thing doing. Did you just give me a nice steady platform to put my laptop on? Doesn't it have a base to begin with? And this is really what we want you guys to know. Notice that we have all these additional ports back here. This is this one's really cool because it supports all the way back to VGA, so very, very good. And this is great, right? Maybe you have an external monitor that you want to use or your company wants to use, but they're not going out and doing DisplayPort or HDMI for that fact, right? Because we, in our home environments, right, we like to, I mean, let's face it, we like to have new stuff, right? I don't know about you, Dan, but I like high definition video, so I probably wouldn't want something like VGA anymore.
I like the lowest definition I can possibly get.
Right, yeah. Right. So Dan lives in the 80s still. 80s were great, right? But you know, joking aside, in our home environments, we like to have, you know, the latest and greatest. However, in a company is going to get some kind of 3 to 5 year, you know, run of the lifespan of whatever their device might be. And you might still see that it's VGA or DVI in this matter, right? So, or for that matter, I mean. But you can also see that they can go a little bit farther, and we can have things like, well, actually, those look almost like eSATA ports there, too. So it could be DisplayPort, eSATA. I can't really tell from this point because this has got a dual blade here, so that's got me a little confused.
And it's kind of surrounding that HDMI port.
And it really is.
Really throwing me off.
Yeah, so you got HDMI as well. And remember, one of the things that we talked about in the first part, right, we talked about not having an Ethernet adapter and having to use a dongle. No, docking station, I don't have to worry about it. Click it down, plug a wired connection into it. Now I have connectivity. Now you can also see, and we can run just, you know, through a couple of these, right? You can see that we have the older USB 2.0 ports, right? And then the blue blades. Remember, blue blades. Blue does make it better, right? Not necessarily, but it's a joke around here at IT Pro TV. Blue is the USB 3.0. So notice that we're getting a lot of extended functionality by using one of these devices. Now, I want to make mention of this little thing right here because they also call that out on the exam. All right, this is a physical lock. All right, they talk about cable locks. They talk about a couple different times, right? They talk about physical laptop lock and they talk about cable lock. This would fall probably under the physical laptop lock, and it's exactly what you're probably thinking. All right, laptops are mobile, right? What does that mean? Well, if I have a desktop sitting at my my desk and it has like 10 drives in it, maybe it's a high-end rendering station, it's going to be pretty heavy, right? Now, if you're somebody like Dan, you could put this thing over your shoulder and you could fly away and it'd be no problem. But for somebody like Wes, I'd be struggling to get that thing out the door. Laptops, not so, right? Laptops, because of their mobility, their portability, I guess I should say, they're easy to steal. All right, so if you have one of these, if we could bring that picture back up there real quick, if you have one of these and you have a physical lock, lock and key, right? Now what you have is you have all these different cables that are connected, and these type of docking stations could be mounted to the desk, which means if you walk over and you're going to have to break something. And in the end, if you're a thief and you're only looking for the data, that might be feasible. But if you're wanting to resell this thing on the black market, it's not going to be feasible. So that's the physical lock. But I do want you to understand, too, that there are other types of locks out there. Like they talk about a cable lock, and this is a common one, right? This is, who are we giving credit to? This is Staples, all right? I just like to give people credit for the pictures that they have up here because we use them. We're not really making any money off of these, but, you know, it might be somebody you want to go to, okay? And if you notice, it's like an old Coca-Cola lock key there, right?
Yeah, the barrel keys.
That's exactly it, yes, sir. And what this does is this will have a little lock, and you'll see this coming up because one of the laptops I'm going to show you when we actually get into it and break it apart there, it's an older one, and it has one of these locks. And what I'm really focused in on is that little physical latch, right? It's a little metal blade, and what you do is you put that metal blade into the side of the laptop, use the little Coca-Cola ring lock like Dan mentioned, and you lock it in place and it spins it. And basically to get this laptop off of that lock, you have to rip it right out, right? And then what happens is that this cable physically fastens itself to some portion of the desk, right? So those are there. You know, they don't mention this in this set of objectives, but Dan, I want to take a second because we've talked about it before and mentioned low jack, all right? Low jack is another, if we're talking about keeping laptops safe, all right? Now, I don't have anything for low jack to show you guys, so you just take my word, research on it. This is something that's built into the firmware, and it can work in combination with your GPS system and communicating with a third party that monitors where the heck is that laptop, right? And I'm aging myself here. Where in the world is Carmen Santiago, right? Yeah. Because they can track it, and they can track it through GPS systems. So that is another technology that, while not on the exam objectives here, it is in your A+ exam objectives, and I really think it should be something that should be brought into the laptop section because it also works not only in laptops but also mobile devices. All right. Now, there are other types of screens that we have out there that I just want to briefly mention. With the fact that we have, we want a lot of portability, you will have some laptops out there that will double as tablets, and what they'll have is removable screens. The extent of which those are popular really depends on what you're talking about, because then we start blurring the line. Is that a tablet? Is it a laptop? Is it an Ultrabook? So I'm going to go ahead and just mention them in the context of laptops, but I'll understand they could also fall into mobile devices as well. Is the fact that you have one of these keyboard-based docking stations that you quite literally clip your laptop to, or your tablet to, and it becomes a full-blown type PC. You can see this in things like your Surface devices, the Surface tablets that Microsoft has out there. And again, that's a tablet, right? But at the same time, it could be considered a small miniature laptop. And the fact that it does allow you to, I guess you can't really remove the screen, but you do have those out there as well. You might hear them called like 3-in-1s or 2-in-1s based devices too. For a while, this was popular, and because of tablets too, they also have rotating screens. Again, due to the commonality of tablets today, the screens itself are rotated based on the screen orientation. However, in the earlier days, Lenovo would have these screens that basically you'd open it up, you'd turn the whole thing around, and you'd fold it back down, and essentially you'd use a digitizer and you would work with it like a stylus, and it made your laptop like a tablet. Again, because we have these 2-in-1s where you could pull the tablet right out of it, or tablets in general, you're kind of seeing those becoming a thing of the past. But essentially that was nothing more than the laptop opening up. Your display would swivel around 180 degrees and you could fold it back down, and now you could use a digitizer. A digitizer, guys, is a little bit different than a stylus, and this is in the exam objectives here. A stylus is nothing more than some kind of magnetic pen or even plastic pen. All right, a digitizer is different because it has logic, a battery, and a lot of times a driver. There's communication that has to happen, right? You see this in interactive whiteboards and stuff if you're in a, in some kind of academia or...
Wacom tablets
yes.
are a good prime example.
Great example, too. The Eno boards, interactive whiteboards, and again, it's because there's a logic board in there, right? Quick thing on the Eno boards, it's like a massive QR code. And what it has is a little optical sensor in it, and when you touch it to the board, it essentially takes a picture and it sends it through the driver and a wireless interface back to the PC, and the PC says, oh, that's where you are, and that's how it does. The Wacom tablets use I believe they're capacitive touch versus resistive touch, which uses a series of resistive layers that when you make a touch on the screen, 2 points connect, and that's how it kind of triangulates your position. All different kinds of great, cool little touchscreen technologies that are out there. They have acoustic wave interface too that uses an acoustic sound, and when you touch the tablet, it breaks that wave, and it says, "Oh, that's where you are." I don't think you have to worry about too much about those interfaces here. Now, Dan, I know we're coming up on the end of this one. I do want to mention one last thing here as well inside of this, and I'm going to just brief over this. And the reason I say that, guys, is we've already covered this in our display devices section. But Dan and I were kind of talking before the show started, and you made a good point. Well, hey, it is in here, so it makes sense to keep it here. LCD screens, right? Two primary types of LCD screens. You have the twisted pneumatic, and you have the in-plane switching, as well as fluorescent backlighting. They're called CCTFLs, cold cathode fluorescent lamps, as well as LED-based backlighting. And more prevalent today, you've already mentioned it too when you mentioned the little strip that's on the back of the MacBooks for the function keys, is OLED, and that's organic light emitting diode. The backlighting system, rather than using just a straight LED or even a little RGB LED, is literally an organic substance that they apply electricity to, and it makes a phosphorus glow, and much more than that. It makes some of the highest resolution, and one of the greatest things about OLED, remember we talked about battery life? OLED is probably one of the least when it comes to power consumption out of all of your mobile device interfaces. That's why it's really, really good in things like cell phones, tablets, as well as many of your different laptops. Now, Dan, I know I talked a lot about that one, and I told you we were going to show you some additional stuff, but I don't really think we have enough time in this episode.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like doing the math. Yeah, we have 0 seconds left in this episode, so yeah, not enough time here, but that's great. We'll just roll into a part 3 and look at some of the other things that we have to know about as far as the A+ exam goes with working with our laptop components. Wes, we do thank you for stopping by. We thank our audience for watching, but signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.